Hello, hello, hello. I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met one that wasn't truly brilliant at something, not one. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Catherine Morgan. Catherine Morgan is an entrepreneur, certified financial coach, qualified financial advisor, and trauma of money expert. Her number one international Amazon best-selling book, It's Not About the Money, offers a trauma-informed psychological approach to money for women. She's the founder of the Money Panel and the Money Story Types. She also partners with Virgin Unite, working alongside Sir Richard Branson to create initiatives that reduce financial trauma for women. Catherine is on a mission to increase financial resilience for 1 million women for greater financial equality. She is regularly featured in Radio for Women's Hour, Forbes, The Times, The Financial Times, and more. Welcome, Catherine. Did I get all of that right?
It's always that really awkward moment when you have to sit and listen to your bio being read out. But you did it beautifully, Tracy. So thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, I am really interested to have this conversation. Money has been my thing to work on in well, it actually started in 2020. It's been 2 years now. So with the ADHD brain and our now and not now propensities and nothing in between, I know that we can really struggle with money at times. Often we don't even care. However, how I always start all these podcasts out is I want to know your ADHD story because I think it really helps connect you to our listeners. So, would you mind telling me what is your ADHD diagnosis story?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. I actually haven't shared this hugely other than on my own podcast. So it was really great to be able to contemplate actually my own experience with ADHD. And it's been still quite recent. So I had my diagnosis last summer. That would have been the summer of 2023. And the only reason I went down the pathway of self-diagnosis was because my eldest son, I've got two boys, G&T, not a refreshing drink, although I could probably do with one of those right now. But my eldest George was diagnosed or was going through the diagnosis journey. And as many parents, I think, will find when they're going through this with their children, is they start to go, I kind of recognize this in myself. And I have had and experienced a lot of trauma in my life. And as I was talking to the psychologist about ADHD symptoms, I was thinking, is what my experience has been in life to do with trauma, or is it to do with neurodivergence, right? And so my journey was I actually decided to go for my own diagnosis. I didn't necessarily expect that I would be diagnosed with ADHD, and I had a multiple assessment. I had an assessment for ADHD and autism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember when the psychologist came back to my home to deliver the diagnosis, and he went, "What do you think am I going to say?" And I was like, "Maybe I've got some of the symptoms, but not enough for a diagnosis." And he went, "No, you scored the highest possible score for the impulse side of
Mm.
ADHD." And I was like, there's different forms of ADHD. Like, I just didn't even know that that existed. I, as most people do, related ADHD to hyperactivity and not being able to sit still
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to focus. And actually, I'm very good at those things. So it was a real shock to then receive the diagnosis. Plus, I think it would have been confirmed that I have very high autistic traits as well, but not enough for a full diagnosis. My psychologist thinks that I have just masked for so many years that there wasn't really enough evidence to support that. So yeah, that was my experience. I've gone from going through this with my son to all of a sudden actually myself being diagnosed. And when I was diagnosed, it was really hard. I really struggled to not accept the diagnosis because I didn't have any issues with it. I didn't label myself, don't believe in labeling myself. But what I found really challenging was the acceptance that I could have avoided a lot of high T trauma situations growing up had I have known that
Mm.
I had ADHD. And it left me feeling very sad and
Mm.
full of quite a lot of grief. And it took me 9 to 10 months to process the whole
Oh,
journey for me. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. You know, one of the things that I have noticed is when you get diagnosed with one thing, like ADHD, or like trauma, or like dyslexia, most clinicians, all they see is that one thing. They
Yeah.
don't understand how they're all interconnected, and a little bit of a lot of different diagnoses can add up to one big problem. So there's so many things that you said that I want to unpack. We know that the symptoms of ADHD and trauma pretty much mirror each other. And so, if you have trauma and then on top of it you have ADHD, you can often have double the amount of symptoms. In a 10 of ADHD, that's what you were diagnosed with, correct?
Yes.
And that's the one that it seems they typically miss in women. Because were you a really good student?
Yeah, I was pretty good. I had really good grades at school.
Mhm.
I unfortunately had a lot of eating disorder issues as I went through my like later education, which did affect my grades, but I was still considered a very focused student. In my primary school period was very different. In my primary school, like my whole report is full of Catherine struggling with friendship groups and she's shouting out in class. And what's interesting when I think back is that I'd obviously been clobbered over the head for doing these things. And then so as I went into secondary, I just masked the whole way through.
By secondary, you had figured out what you needed to do to have friends and, do all well, I don't know. Did you figure out how to have friends by secondary? Was that what was going on by masking?
No, actually, my friendship relationships still struggled in secondary. I had one really good friend, and I became, in hindsight, looking back, quite codependent on that relationship. And I think that's a really common behavioral trait is that, often it can come hand in hand with codependency. So that definitely showed up for me growing up.
And was she a lot like you? She was your really good friend, but were you her really good friend as well?
Yeah, do you know, I've never even thought about that. So interesting. Was she similar to me? Yes and no. I think that she was a very sensitive soul, and I definitely relate to, the hypersensitivity and almost like seeing things in a very different way. Like one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I have a huge sense of justice. So if there's something that is wrong, I'm very vocal about that, and I feel very passionate about anything in the world that is unjust. Like that's the only thing that really makes me kind of, quite not
Mhm.
cross or angry, but quite passionate.
Yeah.
So she had those similar qualities. So maybe that's
Mhm.
where the friendship connected.
Yeah. So the other thing is that where does the ADHD end and the autism begin? Or where does the autism end and the ADHD begin? We know, they use that awful term comorbidity, let's say co occurring conditions. We know that many, many people with autism also have ADHD, and the same thing with people with ADHD have autism. And, you talk about justice sensitivity, and I think, okay, that's an ADHD trait, but extreme justice sensitivity can also be an autism trait. So it's almost like you have ADHD and it's more of these symptoms, and then that pushes it off into autism. So I'm curious from you, how do you answer that question? You were diagnosed with ADHD, but you were also thinking, oh, there's probably some autism. What were the things, your traits, behaviors that led you to believe that, there's probably autism too? Like it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. Like, I definitely got to the stage where I was reading every single book, hyper focus kicks in. I'm reading every single book, listening to every single podcast, watching every single YouTube video. And I just got to the stage where I was like, this is not really supporting me at all. Really, what made the difference was just understanding that I have these amazing superpowers and really coming into it from a place of love and compassion and actually dropping the labels of whether it's ADHD or autism, it doesn't, or Asperger's, or whatever the historical terms were, and just moving into a place of acceptance. And I couldn't move into acceptance until I let go of all of the societal, cultural expectations of you have to have these symptoms in
Yes.
order to be categorized as neurodivergent with this. Because at the end of the day, I don't really know whether this is just part of my personality or it's part of my social conditioning or it's part of my inherited family generational patterns or whether it's neurodivergence. So
Or it's all of them.
yeah, probably all of them. So yeah, I think just letting go of the list of
Hmm.
symptoms that society imposes on us as social conditioning, it was more about just acceptance of this is who I am, labels or none. This is, I'm
Yeah.
proud to be who I am, and I'm proud to lean into the positive traits, and the ones that are a challenge, I have learned how to cope with those, how to be resilient, how to pull in support where and when I need it.
So it sounds like the grief for you was really more about the shame that you carried and not knowing. And had you known, then you could have been really proud, right, of who you are and that, yes, you have this different brain, but look at all these gifts that it brings with it.
Yeah, I definitely think because my work is very centered around trauma, the sadness for me was the grief in actually, if I'd have known this, would I have avoided going into those high risk situations, which my brain didn't have the cognitive capacity to be able to recognize that this is a pretty high risk situation. You maybe shouldn't go down that dark alley, whereas my brain, it just sees everything as opportunity, and I don't mind taking risks. I'm very impulsive, and I love that about myself. And I think the shame was around maybe I could have avoided some of those high T situations had I have known that about myself earlier on.
Have you flipped it at this point to, I believe our best purposes give meaning to our past? And because you've been through that, I expect that the people that you work with, you can really relate to them because you're basically them.
Yeah, it's been really interesting actually. Since I had my diagnosis and I talked about it on my own podcast, I've definitely had more of the kind of mirroring of my ideal clients. Like, I don't
Hmm.
know what the percentage is, but I reckon like 80% of my students and my clients are definitely neurodivergent. And so being very vulnerable and talking about my journey has really helped them to feel related, and particularly around money, right? Because there are so many like things that are connected to overspending, for example, and trauma around money that is deeply connected into ADHD. And I feel like sharing that experience in my own journey has really helped them to release a lot of their own shame around money. And also, I think for a lot of people that may be on this periphery of, I think I might have ADHD, but maybe this is just a trend, you know? That was my worry. I was really worried about what my mum might say if she heard me talking about this on my podcast, and then thinking, oh, maybe I should have got her diagnosed, or why didn't I spot these symptoms? I didn't want to put shame on her. And so I was really worried about, is this just a trend? Am I just jumping on the bandwagon? I was really worried about that. And I think when I actually had my diagnosis and just talking about it, so many people have reached out to me and gone, thank you so much. I've now gone and had my diagnosis and I don't have to hold this shame anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it's a trend. It's a trend of finally having the information. And so it's spreading because we want to know, why are we the way we are, and how do we become proud of the way our brain works? So you said, oh, I let go of all the labels, but I'm going to bring you back a little bit because this is a thought that I had. Most of us with ADHD struggle with money. And it's just the way our brain works. We tend to be impulsive. We tend to be very optimistic. Oh, it'll work out just fine. We have no sense of time, like all of those things, right? Where, wait, it's 30 days already? And we're bad at, even though we need systems so badly, we're not very good at creating them. And so, have you always been good with money? Because I want to tie it to something then, because this is my thought.
Yeah, such a great question. Have I always been good with money? Absolutely not. I
Okay.
was a financial advisor for over 20 years.
You're like me.
Yeah, I lived in £30,000 worth of debt. Right? You can imagine the shame. Like the shame. How can you be a financial advisor and have loads of debt, right? And it was a huge revelation for me, was actually understanding that the relationship I had with money was really a mirror reflection of the relationship I had with myself.
Absolutely. But then I would ask, so if there's autism, we know that, part of the deal, and I've always found the most successful women that I meet have a little bit of autism and a little bit of ADHD, or a lot of one of them, right? And it's the systems that they desire and need to feel safe, right? That actually helps with their ADHD because, oh yeah, they're impulsive, they're fearless, but there's always something reining them back in. And so I just assume that, oh, because you think there's some autism there, you must like system and structure. And so why wouldn't you have applied that to money? Because I think the problem that most people with ADHD have with money is that money is, it's finite, it's definite, it's exact. It's the exact opposite of how our brains work, which is more loosey-goosey and let it flow and spontaneity. So I'd love to hear. I'm surprised you said that. I love that you said that. So I'd like to hear more about that. And I do want to tell you that I was actually a finance attorney for the US Securities and Exchange Commission. We worked on the team, the team that, prosecuted financial fraud. And I didn't understand money at all. So I love that you were a financial advisor.
Yeah, I think, and this is interesting, right? Is that there's a lot of shaming and shoulding that goes with money.
Mm-hmm.
I should be good with money because I've got all of this financial knowledge. I've actually just recorded a podcast today talking about financial shame and also burying your head in the sand, right? It's not related or connected to the amount of financial knowledge that you have. We do not make rational money decisions. Even if you are the most organized person with all of your money systems and your budget sheets and all of those things, doesn't mean that you're always going to make good financial decisions, right? Because we make decisions based on how we feel. We make decisions based on how we feel, based on how we think, and that comes from the body. It's a body reaction. So for me, even though I had this bunch of financial knowledge, the reason, and I had budget planners, I had spreadsheets, I loved my spreadsheets, I loved all of my financial systems, right? The reason I wasn't following those, I wasn't sticking to my budget, is because I didn't feel worthy of holding money. So for me, money equaled manipulation, power, and control by men. Because as growing up, my mum was financially abused. Actually, generationally, there was lots of patterns around money too. So my relationship with money was based on money not being safe. And when money's not safe, we find every excuse to get rid of it and spend it as quickly as possible because safety is fight or flight. A lack of safety sends your nervous system into fight or flight response. Like there is a literal danger. The brain doesn't know how to differentiate between truth and non-truth. So we literally believe that there is a tiger running towards me with money. So of course I don't want to be anywhere near that tiger. So I'm going to get rid of that money as quickly as possible. So when I was employed as a financial advisor, I would get rid of it through clothes and spending money on clothes. And when I was self-employed in my early years, I would get rid of that money by undercharging, overgiving, people pleasing, and over investing in coaches and in programs because I didn't believe in myself.
I love that. So you went from being a financial advisor to what? Like, what was your process?
Yeah. So I had a real significant light bulb moment in my life, and it was on the 1st of October 2013. And on this particular day, I was on maternity leave from being a financial advisor at the bank. And I was tucked up in my home in the middle of the United Kingdom, a place called Milton Keynes. And it was just going into the winter period. And that particular morning, I dropped my son, my other son, off to nursery. He was 2.5 at the time. And my youngest was asleep in the Moses basket in the bay window of my house. And I had a very good friend of mine coming over that morning to do these baby hand casting sessions where you get them to place their hand in the clay and it presents these beautiful molds. And as the morning went by, Thomas's health and his condition deteriorated rapidly. So he became very listful. He didn't want to feed. Every time I picked him up, he would scream at me. And I remember at about 11 a.m. that day, turning to my friend and saying, would you mind leaving early so I can get Thomas to the doctors? Something's not quite right. And just to put this into perspective, at 5 weeks old at this point, we almost lost him when he was born. So he had some kind of infection at birth and there was a 50-50 chance he was going to survive. So I was already kind of feeling a little bit on tenterhooks about his health. So my friend left. I went over to the Moses basket as I closed the front door behind me. And as I walked over, Thomas was just lying very, very still, eyes wide open. And he was blinking, like every blink was painful. And I remember I rang my friend, she's a nurse. And I said, am I being paranoid? Like, do you think I should take him to hospital or something? And she said, have you checked his temperature? And I said, well, no, because he's cold. So I've been wrapping him up in blankets. And she said, check his temperature. So I checked his temperature and it was 39 degrees, which I'm not sure what the US conversion is there, but anything over like 37 here, it's like, get the cowpole out,
Yeah.
something needs to happen. And I undid his baby grow. And as I undid his baby grow, his hands were just like ice. And I thought, something's not right. I put him into the car seat. I rang my husband and I said, I'm going straight down to A&E. And literally within minutes, I'd arrived in A&E. They put me on a wheelchair. I had Thomas in my arms and they wheeled us into resuscitation. And they kept using this word sepsis.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh God, like, I think I know what that means. I'm not 100%, but that doesn't sound good.
No.
And I was very much in the whole kind of, oh, it will be fine. Like, we'll just easy, calm, just keep a really relaxed kind of demeanor. All these doctors were swarming around us. There's about 15 doctors swarming around the beds. And 48 hours later, he was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. And we had literally a 50-50 chance that he was going to survive through the night.
Oh.
That period in hospital for me, he's now a very, very happy 11-year-old boy. I'm pleased to say. And that period for me was when I was in hospital with him, hearing all of this jargon that I didn't understand. When I went back to work a year later, I was sitting in the bank. I was helping this 57-year-old lady who just lost her husband sort out all of her financial paperwork. She didn't understand what shares were. She didn't understand what the investment accounts meant. My sales manager was calling me after that meeting to say, how many products did you sell her? How many cross sales did you make? And I was like, I didn't sell her any products because she didn't need any. She just needed someone to help her understand money. And it was this light bulb moment that I realized that the jargon that I had heard in hospital, which made me feel so much shame that I should have known the symptoms of septicemia in babies.
Mm.
I should have known that cold hands, cold feet, high fever was a symptom. In the same way that this woman who just lost her husband had no idea how to manage money. And it was this big light bulb of, why are we using so much jargon in financial services? And literally, I resigned, I handed my notice in, and I started talking about my relationship with money in the way I am with you now. And that slowly grew in the first 12 months to a blog based business. And then within 2 years, I'd moved that business to a 7-figure business, helping women to be financially resilient. And that was my transition journey from being a financial advisor into being a financial coach.
By doing that, did you also resolve your money issues by helping these women?
Yeah. So in that process, I was diagnosed with PTSD after my son was very poorly. And I recognized that I needed some help. And it was as I was going through therapy, actually, that I was realizing that my relationship with anxiety and trauma was highly rooted in my sense of self and worthiness and some prior experiences. And as I was going through that journey of better understanding myself, I started to actually understand through studying money psychology that maybe this is why I am like I am with money. And it completely transformed everything. I then went on to study, of course, every single modality, NLP, psychology studies, therapeutic tools like emotional freedom technique, and all these different tools. And I was like, I suddenly started to recognize how I could shift my own relationship with money. And I went from £30,000 in debt to 7 figures in my bank account and holding 7 figures in my bank account, not feeling like I had to get rid of it.
What happened then once you were diagnosed with ADHD? Anything more related to money? And when you were doing this coaching and you were working with, do you only work with women, Catherine?
Well, predominantly we do, but we also run a financial coach certification, and that's for both men and women.
Okay. So while you were working with women primarily, in the day to day, right, trying to help them understand how money works and, get rid of their money trauma and all of that, or at least, I don't know if you can ever get rid of it, but you can at least control it. Did you wonder, like, well, because I'm sure there are some women that just really struggled with this and maybe they were never able to come to peace with it all. And so I'm curious, were you wondering, like, why does this work so well with most people, but then there's a certain segment of the population where I just can't seem to get to them?
Yeah, I think from that question, what that makes me think about is that there are definitely, in the way that I teach, there are definitely still some women with ADHD who really struggle with some of the things that work for me, right?
Yep.
And so really believe there is not a cookie cutter approach to managing money if you
True.
have ADHD, right? And for
Yeah.
most people, the traditional ways of managing money do not work,
Yeah.
right? You can beat yourself over, over the head several million times as to why I'm not sticking to a budget. Budgets just don't work, in my opinion, for the majority of people with ADHD. So it's about it's almost like just throw everything out, throw the rule books out the window. Like, don't should on yourself that because a lot of the money experts tell you that you should have a budget plan and zero budget your balance every month. It doesn't work. So don't bother trying.
I am so happy to hear you say that because that's exactly where I came down. It was like, this is not fun. This is not challenging because it's so boring and I can't do it. And it's certainly not social. So I guess fear, sort of, but that doesn't really work for me either because I'm pretty fearless. I read this somewhere that men are taught to invest from the time they're little. Women are told to save and sacrifice, and oh my gosh, you better not have that latte, right? And so my thought was, okay, well, what if I used my ADHD brain to my advantage and I just skipped all the budgeting, saving, all of that, and I just went right to investing, but I did it in a way that I would set it and forget it. And then I used that part of my brain that can't remember a whole lot of that kind of thing. Like I forget, but then I'll be on my phone and I'll be scrolling and I'm like, oh, it's that account. And it makes me feel good. It's dopamine. So that is how I ultimately got through it all because I could not do all those things. And I've never heard a financial coach,
A money expert.
I've never heard a money expert actually say that. And so one of the things, I just did a money thing for ADA. And one of the things that really, so I wrote this book. I had a whole chapter on money. I was interviewed by this wonderful reporter about my book and the money section, and it was one of the top financial media conglomerates. I think she put one thing in there I said. She literally just put all the same old stuff that everybody tells you about money. And she thinks she had ADHD, so I couldn't really figure out why. But you're so right. There's certain ways that you're supposed to save and budget. And does that come from that whole puritanical work ethic? And we're supposed to suffer. And that's the only legitimate way to actually have money?
I think it comes from a very masculine way of approaching money, you know? And there are many masculine ways that can be supportive to manage money. We do need a little bit of action taking and some thought process and all of those things. But what I generally find is that a lot of money stuff is taught by men. A lot of money budgeting is taught by men. It comes from the financial services system, which is predominantly men, right? And also, I think that there seems to be this fear that if we tell people to don't worry about a budget, that something bad is going to happen, right? It's like the world's going to collapse if people don't have a budget in place. And I just don't think that that is the only way. I think that there are some kind of budgets that can work. So, for example, if you follow more of the money pot system or the kind of 50-30-10 rule, like 50-30, is it 50-30-20 or 50-30-10 rule? Like that can be supportive because it's more around frameworks rather than budgets. But the word budget is restricted. Like, who wants to restrict their money, right? Especially if you have ADHD, because you want that dopamine hit. You're seeking those dopamine rewards. And so in my book, I talk about giving every pound a purpose.
Uh-huh.
And if you think about the purpose, what is going to drive you is your value system. You can get out of bed and get on board with, I want to allocate some money this month to my own well-being or to give to this charity that I really support and believe in, or I want to actually spend some money on my kids this month. We can get on board with value-based systems, but we can't get on board with restricting, putting money into a box and it being very controlling. And that's where we can bring more of that femininity into like the feminine side of how do we embrace more of the flow, less structure, less control, and it still be good for you to manage your finances in that way. So if you have you mentioned about investing being really exciting. Like, that's great. Like, harness that. Maybe if you're considering buying something in the stores and you're like, okay, I might be being a bit impulsive, use the cooling off period, walk away, give yourself 48 hours, and then ask yourself, well, what would I do with this if I wasn't going to spend it on this? Well, maybe I'd invest it in, rather than buying first class tickets on an airline, maybe I will invest that £1,000 and compounding that over time. That could be worth like £10,000 in 10 years'
Mm-hmm.
time, which feels better for me, and then making decisions from that place.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there have been times where I was just going to willy-nilly buy something because that's what I used to do. And I stopped, paused, and I actually said, "Does this support my intention?" No. And so then what I did is I just picked up my phone and I took that amount of money that I was going to spend on that thing and I put it in that investment account because I can, I've set it so it does it every week, but it has the capability to just move money at any time. So I love that. So, Catherine, we've been talking about money trauma. We've used that term, and I certainly don't have any big T trauma, but I definitely have money trauma. But I'm not even sure, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so money trauma, don't be put off by the word trauma. A lot
Mhm.
of people think that trauma is only for soldiers that have fought in the war, people that have been through, high T situations, high trauma
Mhm.
situations. But really, trauma is simply a disruption to the nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's something that makes us feel disconnected or disempowered in some way. And so, actually, all of us have experienced money trauma in some degree, whether that is you being made redundant from work, whether
Mm.
you've been through a divorce and you've had some really messy financial conversations. It could be where you have undercharged in your business or not asked for a pay rise, or maybe you've had an argument with somebody around money, particularly a partner. These can just be situations where your nervous system is feeling unsafe in some way. And that's essentially what can create a money trauma. Now, some money traumas can actually be very significant, others quite mild, but really it's the perception, it's the meaning that we have given to money that creates the trauma itself.
You also used the term financially abused, and I don't know that I've ever heard it worded that way, but I know so many women in this generation who absolutely are financially abused, and they don't even realize that there's anything wrong with that.
It's interesting that you raise that, because when I qualified as a financial abuse specialist, I was the same. I'd never heard of this term
Mhm.
before. I'd heard of financial manipulation or coercive control or narcissism, like these kind of terms, but I'd never heard of financial abuse. And actually, certainly in the UK, there are more parents and grandparents experiencing financial abuse than ever before. And money can often be used in a very manipulative way in families, which is really
Yeah.
quite shocking. And in the US, for example, you only have to look at the Britney Spears case that we had
Yeah.
not that long ago to really see an evidence of significant financial abuse in families, and it really saddens me to think that there are a lot of women who don't recognize that they are being financially abused. They don't recognize some of the red flags. And even when they do, they often can't do anything about it
Mhm.
because there can be coercive control where they're taken away from their friendship circles and they
Totally.
don't have access to money, right? That's the whole point of financial abuse, is that the other person involved in that abuse is restricting money, which means that that other person, whether it be a woman or a man, doesn't have free access to be able to get out of that situation.
This happens in really wealthy families too. I had a friend, exact same thing. And you would have never known it just by virtue of the way she dressed, how she looked. She was always so well put together, but it wasn't until they started going through a divorce that all of this came out. And I'm thinking right now of RFK Jr., who his wife died by suicide. And apparently, I mean, this is a very, very wealthy family. He had cut all the money off. And so she was going around to family and friends trying to get help so she wouldn't lose her home. I mean, it's not, because you can kind of understand in a situation where there is no money. But when there is plenty of money and this kind of stuff goes on, it's it should be criminal.
Yeah, and I think that the more I'm so glad you've raised it, because I think the more that we bring awareness to this subject and some of the like the signs of financial abuse,
Can you talk about that, Catherine? Because there are probably listeners who've never heard this term and they don't even realize that that's what's going on right now with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, some of them are quite obvious ones, where money is very much restricted in a relationship. So, if you're going to dinner with girlfriend and she's like, I can't pay for this because I don't have, my husband or my partner hasn't paid the money into my account this month, or, you might notice just in the language that she uses that you might start to think, why has she not got access to that money herself? And she might say, oh, my husband says it should be in his name for tax reasons, la, la, la. And it's like, no, you should have access to money yourself, right? So that can be a bit of a red flag. It could also be where money is physically restricted. So it's limited in some way. So maybe, she's talking about having an allowance that she's receiving every month, or, where money is kind of on a bit of a string, they're pulling the strings with those decisions. Yeah, absolutely. Those are some of the most like obvious ones, but it can also be things like not being able to make their own financial decisions.
Or not participating, right? Where, oh, no, 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 this is what I do. I make these decisions.
Yeah, like especially for financial advisors, like if they're only seeing one person in that
Hmm.
conversation, it's like, where's the other person in this conversation? Not just, I'll take this paperwork home and my wife will sign it or my partner will sign it. It's like, well, where is this other person in the conversation? So that there's lots of kind of obvious ones that if you spot them, I would definitely encourage any woman listening to this podcast to just open up that conversation with that other person. Like, do you realize that this may be quite controlling, or do you realize that this is not a necessarily a healthy way of managing money? And it might just be that she's never
Hmm.
realized or recognized
Hmm.
this, or it might be that actually she does know and she really needs some help.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if something happens to you, I don't have a clue, right? What's going on. Or this actually is affecting our relationship. The safety I feel, the trust that I feel. So might make you feel safer, but it makes me feel less safe.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting as well is like they're in a relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, we often have the opposite relationship to money to our partners,
Hmm.
right? So I'll give you an example of this. We have our money story types quiz, which you can grab on our website. And every time I get partners to do this, like my husband is the architect, so he's the natural planner with money.
Uh-huh.
I'm the impulsive, right, which is
Uh-huh.
built on my money story. And he wants to get all the spreadsheets out and all the planners out. And I just don't want to have that conversation because it feels too controlling,
Yeah.
right? And so I think just recognizing that we actually are naturally related and actually attracted to somebody with the opposite relationship to money. So just knowing that, you can really start to have a bit more fun and less seriousness with money by just going, okay, cool, you're a good planner. I'm good at spending it. How do we come together to balance out this relationship?
What advice would you give to women with ADHD who feel overwhelmed by their financial situation? They've got themselves to listen to this conversation, which that in itself can be difficult because
Yeah.
I know there was a time whenever money was discussed, I didn't want to be part of that. It just made me so uncomfortable. What would you recommend?
I think the first thing is just to recognize that the reason that money is hard when you have ADHD is because your brain has a different way of, the executive function in the brain is different, right? The executive functional part of the brain is to do with planning and organization.
Hmm.
So the first thing I would say is just unlearn all the things that you have learned about money.
Mm.
Right? Unlearn all of the things that you are reading and hearing about, have these budget planners and stick to your budget. Just unlearn all of that and really think about what could you get on board with? So
Hmm.
for some people listening to this, that might be breaking down money tasks into really small steps. So rather than thinking of money as this huge, great big topic, and thinking about all the actions that are required around savings goals and investing goals and sorting out your pension and your life insurance and your wills and all the things, just pick one theme per month, have a money date with yourself, schedule 15 minutes a week or a month, whatever is good for you, and just pick one area of your finances and use your hyper focus if that works for you. Use that creativity, that impulsiveness to create these dopamine hits. So if you can get little things ticked off the list, we all love our tick lists, or you're just starting to make a little bit of progress in one small area, that can be really helpful for a lot of people. Yeah, rather than just trying to do everything at the same time.
So, is there one area, and I know, just because it works for you doesn't mean it'll work for me, but is there one area, one little change that usually is pretty successful with brains like ours?
The one most successful thing actually is just automate everything. Automate as much as you can. Use the likes of AI and
Mhm.
money apps that you can plug into your bank account that will automatically round up your spending, put money into your savings pot every month. Like, automate the hell out of as much as you possibly can.
Catherine, what I never realized is I would never miss it. It would literally come out, and I do it every week because it seems less painful than every month. I don't even miss it. I don't remember it. Like, it's insane. My brain just, that's the way it works. Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. And that's a really good tip as well, Tracy, is that out of sight, out of mind. If you know that you are the type of person who is more resistant or more sensitive to overspending,
Mhm.
then have multiple bank accounts or savings pots where I mean, like today, like you would think, right? I've got my wealth map. I know where everything is. Today, I had an email from Wealthify saying, you have got a statement for one of your investment accounts. And I'm like, when did I have an investment account with Wealthify? And I logged in and I had like £330 in there. I'd obviously put a one-off 250 quid in there. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, amazing. Completely forgot I had this. And then I was like, I thought I was really organized with money. I've got my wealth maps and, I'm checking in with it every month. And I completely forgotten about this investment
Yeah.
account. So, I think out of sight, out of mind can actually be really nice. I had a massive, gorgeous dopamine hit today of, yay, I've just made £330.
That's the other thing, right? Just every day. Like, I just did this with a friend where for a whole week, and I set it on like this manifestation. I set it on so to show up first thing in the morning, middle of the day, and then in the evening. And it's just all about, how what it makes me do is look for all the ways that money comes into my life. And that is so calming. I think often with our ADHD brains, we're just blowing through stuff and we don't realize how much really is, money is coming into our life, even if it's, oh, well, I was going to purchase this thing. It was intentional. And look, it's 50% off, right? So then I've made that 50%. So, just silly things. But let me read it. I cannot help but to attract a lot of money into my life because I am a lender, not a borrower. I'm a money magnet. Money is always attracted to me. Money is my birthright, and the universe is my supplier. Now, a
Love
lot of
that.
people will hear that and think that is the stupidest thing, but I am telling you it works because what it allows me to do is start to create a more positive relationship with money instead of this big bad boogeyman, right? Where it's never enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would go further than that as well. And I love that so much. Like I love the affirmation work so, so much. And you can anchor that. So when you create a money affirmation, what the
Mm-hmm.
brain loves is anchor points because those anchor points create safety.
Okay.
And so you could like write that on your mirror. You can put it on your phone as a screensaver. When you
Yep.
have your money date, for example, you bring that into your space. And one of the things I love to do is to make it a real all body experience, all sensory
Mm-hmm.
experience. So when you have your money date with yourself and you're going to pick this one area of your finances, the first thing to do is to get your nervous system regulated. So I would
Yes.
always encourage women listening to this to, first of all, create that gorgeous space around you, and then to use, whether you're using breath work or meditation, or we use heart healing in
Tapping.
our business, or tapping, yeah, whatever tools you already have available to you, you can just simply close down your eyes, drop into your breath, notice the temperature difference as you breathe in through your nose, out through the mouth, and just like regulate your nervous system, get into a place where you're really nice and calm, because the ADHD brain is going to, be firing on all cylinders,
Right.
right? And then once your nervous system is feeling regulated, then the next step is then to just have a think about what you want to do around money for that moment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that might be just working your affirmations, it might be doing some practical work. For me, I love tuning into my vision and my purpose in
Mm-hmm.
life, and how money can be used to do more of those things, like more money, more impact. That gets me fired up. It gets my adrenaline running. It gets my serotonin running through the body, and I get really excited. I'll put some music on. I'll light a nice candle. I'll bring the whole sensory
Right.
participation into that money date, right? And then when you're feeling really great, then you can start to, maybe do some things with money, or not. Maybe just sit there and go, I'm just going to keep a journal for the next 30 days on, how do I feel about money today? How do I feel about money? If money were a person, how do I feel about money today? Am I good friends with it? Have I maybe been neglecting it a little bit? Do I need to give it a bit more nurturing? Like, if money were a person, how would I feel about money in that day? And I might just journal around that every day for a month and see how that improves my relationship to money.
It's like everything with ADHD. When we are in positive emotion, we can do anything. But when we're in negative emotion fighting things, we can't get out of our own way. Okay, last question, Catherine, and then I want to hear more about, what you're working on, where people can find you. But what is your number one ADHD workaround?
Oh, such a good question. So I think for me, like, a really good workaround, I mean, some people use things like body doubling to get things done in
Mm-hmm.
life with ADHD. And I'm sure some of your guests have talked about body doubling before, but I definitely find that if I'm just not feeling particularly regulated, that just having somebody with me where I can bounce ideas off,
Mm-hmm.
talk something through with somebody, that for me is just such gold, because I am an overthinker,
Mm-hmm.
overthink everything. And then sometimes I get into procrastination and I don't make decisions. And it's the silliest of things. Like, I can make a decision about moving countries tomorrow. Like, if you said to me, Tracy, let's just go and move to New York, I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, let's just make it happen.
I'm thinking about moving to where you are over in Europe.
Maybe not. Maybe we definitely need a very regulated nervous system to be moving there right now, for sure. But actually, like, choosing what I'm going to have on the menu at a restaurant, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even decide between the salmon and the burger. It's so hard. So I definitely find that having just a body double, or somebody that could be with you while you're packing your suitcase or while you're trying to make your decisions, I just find that really, really valuable.
That's a great one. Great one. Because the thing about it, Catherine, is you have the answers inside of yourself, right? But it's the overthinking, which there's so much good about the overthinking because of all the new ideas.
Yeah.
Um, you just need someone to help pull it out of you. And then as you're speaking it, you're like, oh, well, that's what I need to do. It's so much easier.
It really is. And I think I would like second that with one of the things that I've been really learning about myself is that I'm very intuitive. And just
Hmm.
as you said, Tracy, like, if I just spent a bit more time trusting myself, I would be able to feel safe in my decisions.
Hmm.
And one of the things I've just started doing actually is, I'm a big advocate of numerology, and
Hmm.
I am a 22 in numerology. So I'm the architect of change, the same as Sir Richard Branson, actually.
Hmm.
Everything I do is about change in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my numerologist has been asking of me is to grab a journal and a tarot deck, and I draw a tarot card and I write the name of the tarot card down. So this morning I had Queen of Pentacles, and I don't even really know what it means, but I look it up in my little book. That's like, she looks quite cool. She's got money in her hand, so that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just write I look it up, I look up the meaning of the card, and I just write one sentence about
Hmm.
what does that mean for me and my day ahead. And actually, for me, that what that really does is just allows me to tap into my intuition,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and I think that that's such a powerful gift that for all women, our intuition is one of the most incredible, most powerful gifts
Yep.
that we have, and we need to learn how to use it more.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, society often does not value it, right? I'm just feeling a lot more vocal lately.
I can understand why we need that.
Fit in and get along and screw that. Okay, Catherine, where can people find you if they want to know more about your program, what you do, they want to find your podcast, all of it?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, if you want to explore your own relationship with money, I would definitely come over and do your money archetypes. So, we call this the money story types assessment. You can grab that over at catherinemorgan.com/quiz. If you are a reader, I have a Amazon best-selling book called It's Not About the Money. And again, that's on the website, or you can grab that on Amazon. And if you're a podcast listener, which obviously you are because you're listening to Tracy's awesome show, the podcast is called It's Not About the Money. So any of those places would be wonderful to connect with you.
So if they go to catherinemorgan.com, will they find all of these links there?
Everything's on the site, yes.
Wonderful. Catherine, I want to have you back. This has been a fascinating conversation. I love what you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. And I have been listening to your show myself, Tracy, over the last few months since you reached out to me. And I've learned so much more about myself listening to your incredible guests. So thank you for all the work that you do in the world too.
Thank you, Catherine. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Catherine, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week.